que se han tomado el tiempo de ser generosos con su conocimiento y experiencia, y a todo el equipo organizador de este evento, incluyendo naturalmente a los patrocinadores. Quisiera agradecer también a quienes se tomaron el tiempo de responder la encuesta que hicimos circular el día de ayer. Esta información ha sido muy útil para el enfoque de los presentadores de este evento de cierre. And now I'm going to start speaking in English and turn on my chronometer. I'm pleased to share this closing webinar with two outstanding professionals, Aisha and Jim, that really don't need presentations. I remember the last time we were together in person 1 year ago in Stockholm, Sweden. It was an event organized by the DRPF where Aisha was a wonderful host. I remember particularly the fantastic dinner in the Varna Museum where I sit close to an original Viking navy. No one of us could imagine that 1 year after we would be pushed to change almost any aspect of our lives, including how we work and how we carry on the relationships to each other. This violent change has affected not just our personal sphere, but also the commercial relationships worldwide. And the construction is not the exception of the rule. One could suppose that facing extraordinary circumstances, the commerce and the industry should develop the resilience required to adapt quickly their business, including their contractual framework. Unfortunately, in construction, this diagnosis is unclear, and it is difficult to understand how the flexibility that we show in our personal businesses are not transferred to our commercial relationships. Considering the latter, some questions appear raised on the table. First, is the construction in Latin America a particular case of inflexibility? Second, how the international organizations related to the construction law are seeing our region? And finally, can we get some lessons and good practices from this pandemic? We will try to answer some of these topics in this closing webinar. And I would like to start with a brief presentation of who is Mrs. Aisha Nadar. Aisha is partner of Advocat Human Runland, Sweden, and member of the board of the FIDIC. Mrs. Nadar is active in large-scale cross-border infrastructure and defense programs. For over 30 years, she has handled all phases of their negotiation and implementation. She advises clients on strategic procurement planning, contract drafting, contract management, and dispute resolution. She acts as arbitrator, mediator, adjudicator, and dispute board member, and has experience as president and member of tribunals under ICC, SCC, DIC, AAA, and UNCITRAL rules. She's listed on the panel of conciliators of the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes, CIADI in Spanish, and the FIDIC president lists. She has carried out dispute resolution assignments for organizations such as the World Bank, USAID, and US DOD, and many commercial players. Ms. Nadar holds a BS degree in electrical engineering from the University of Nebraska, an MBA from the University of Texas, Austin, and an LLM in international commercial dispute resolution from the Queen Mary University of London. Impressive bio. Now I let you with Ms. Aisha Nadar. Aisha, now you can take control of the screen when you want.
Thank you very much. And I will, your very kind introduction, and you're absolutely right in your opening statements. I don't think any of us could have imagined last year in Stockholm that we would be coming together virtually like this, but it is an absolute pleasure and privilege to join you today and to join Jim and to join our esteemed colleagues around the world. So I will, without further ado, share my screen and hope that it goes well. Let's see. So I'm assuming that you can see my screen. And I think what I'm going to start doing with you is to kind of set the framework of, Alex talked about the changes and we want to answer some questions, but we thought first to give a foundation on what is FIDIC. Alex was kind enough to send out a survey, and we received some of the polls in those surveys, and we see that there are a lot of you that have experience with FIDIC, but some, and I'm trying to move my screen now, some may not have the familiarity, so that we can kind of set the platform for the discussion. I want to take the next 10 to 12 minutes just to kind of go through what is FIDIC, what are the FIDIC contracts, so then we can use that going forward after Jim's presentation to have the discussion. Well, FIDIC is, and I'm not going to try and say it in French because I don't speak Spanish or French. FIDIC is the International Federation of Consulting Engineers. And FIDIC is the acronym for the French representation of that. It was started over 100 years ago, very much in a francophone, the French, Belgium, and Swiss member associations. And not only, not until after World War II did it start expanding to include the US and the UK. But today we have over 102 member associations. So we're a federation that represents consulting engineering, or the business of consulting engineering internationally. And our members are the member associations in each country. So for example, in Sweden, it's Innovationsföretaget. In the US, it's the Council of Consulting Engineers. And in the UK, Institute of the Consulting Engineers in the UK. So that's how we're framed. We have members from Brazil and from all across Latin and South America. The FIDIC board members are elected to serve a term of 4 years. As Alex said, I was elected in 2016 to serve on the board. There are 9 members. Currently, the president is Bill Howard from the United States, and his predecessor was from France. The secretariat is a small secretariat, and it's housed in Switzerland with a managing director. Many of you, I went to Brazil for the FIDIC ICC conference. One of the last things I did pre-COVID in mid-February, and I went with Nelson Ogun-Shakin, the managing director of FIDIC. Now, FIDIC does a lot of its work through volunteers, and those volunteers are members of standing committees, and we have a variety of standing committees, risk committee, business practices committee, but central to this conversation is the contracts committee. And that contracts committee is what publishes the, I guess, famous FIDIC suite of contracts. The first FIDIC contract was published not until 1957, but since 1957, it has been the FIDIC Red Book and its sister members of the family, which we'll talk about later, have been used around the world. There's a framework of focusing on balanced risk allocation. And what FIDIC means by balanced is allocating the risk to the party that is in the best position to handle that risk, to predict the risk, to handle the risk if it eventuates, and to be able to sustain that risk in case it does eventuate, and also mitigate that risk. They have been in wide international use since the inception in 1957, and as the breadth of the offering grew. There's that long-term use has breeded a familiarity and an increased certainty in the interpretation of a clause in a particular jurisdiction. They are supported by other sister institutions like the Inter-America Development Bank or the World Bank. So they're part of they're recommended or required by various organizations in their standard bidding documents. And obviously there cannot be a standard contract that works perfectly without tailoring in every jurisdiction. So they are adaptable. So they come in 2 parts: the general conditions, which are generally applicable to all projects across the globe, and the particular conditions which allow tailoring for the your particular jurisdiction in which you operate, or the technical contours of your project. but that standardized general conditions with a prescriptive way of tailoring breeds a high degree of familiarity for international bidders, which provides for the possibility of increased competition and the like. So since that 1957 Red Book, the FIDIC family has grown. We published quite a suite of contracts, but the three most popular in use are the 1999 suite, which provide for a design bid build solution or a design build solution type of project delivery method, being the yellow and the silver book. We've added to that the short form of contract. We have a design build operate that's used on certain PPPs, and we also have the newly, well, now maybe not so new, but it launched in 2017, also the Emerald book, which is for underground works. Now, what I'd like to focus this conversation on is FIDIC's approach to dispute management, and I think it's most relevant to how do we manage dealing with risks that eventuate and avoiding those disputes and effectively resolving disputes that occur. FIDIC takes a multi-tiered dispute resolution approach to this. So the focus is on managing your issues such that you can address them as they arise. The first point of call is with the engineer, and then Jim will talk more about the dispute adjudication boards or the dispute boards in general. But I'll say a little bit about how they deal with FIDIC. We have an opportunity for amicable settlement, and finally we have, as the last mechanism, is the final resolution mechanism, international arbitration. But through all this, we try and focus on managing the dispute and the dispute avoidance function. So we see the engineer acting as a conciliator. So the engineer, when faced with a claim, under 3.5 is required to endeavor to help the parties to reach agreement. And only in the case that agreement is not achieved, then the engineer will make a fair determination in accordance with the contract. So acting a bit like a conciliator, where you attempt to help the parties have a conversation and reach their own agreement, and only in the case that they don't reach the agreement, the parties empower the engineer to make a determination under 3.5. And that determination under the yellow book and the red book is binding on the parties, but not final. So they give effect to it once it's issued. But if they are not satisfied with the engineer's determination, they have an opportunity still within the four corners of the contract to review that determination. And that is where the dispute adjudication board enters in. Up until 1995 or 1992, the engineer played both roles, would make the determination and then would decide on a dispute where one of the parties disagreed with the engineer's determination. That, as we entered into a global world, was not so accepted. So then in 1999, the dispute adjudication board became a prominent, permanent feature in the FIDIC contracts. And what that is an independent board that is appointed by both sides, and they make decisions on disputes that one of the parties are disagreeing with the determination that has been made by the engineer. And that there's prescriptive time. That decision has to be made within 84 days. And again, that decision is binding on the parties to give it, where they give effect to it, but it's not yet final once issued. So equipped with, if the parties are still not satisfied with what they see as in this reasoned decision that's issued by the dispute board, they now have an opportunity to use the information in this reasoned decision to be able to reach their own settlement. There's a period of 56 days within the 1999 contract that gives the parties a period of 56 days. Doesn't say how. You can engage an outside mediator possibly, or an expert determination, but a period there while equipped with a reasoned decision from the DAB to possibly reach amicable settlement before escalating to the final dispute resolution mechanism, being ICC arbitration. And every step of the way, there's a possibility to open up and review the determination or the decision that was made in the prior step. So a dispute board can open up an engineer's determination, an arbitrator can open up and revise any decision made by the DAB. And neither party is limited to the arguments that were presented either to the engineer or to the dispute board. Now, we said that the dispute adjudication board's decision is binding once issued, but not yet final. So the parties have a period of 28 days from the issue of the dispute adjudication board decision to give a notice of dissatisfaction. If they do not give a notice of dissatisfaction within that 28 days, the decision then becomes final and binding, and the enforcement of that decision, requesting a party to comply with it, can be the subject of arbitration pursuant to subclause 20.7 itself, without being subjected to 20.4 or 20.5. Now, what I just spoke about was the approach in the 1999 suite. As many of you might know, that we published the second edition of the Red, Yellow, and Silver in 2017. And those updates have tried to capture lessons learned from using the 1999 suite up until the 2017. And one of the things that we learned clearly is that you can't have the benefit of dispute avoidance with a dispute board unless you have a standing dispute board. And I'll leave Jim to talk about the difference between standing and ad hoc, but we in FIDIC no longer recommend the ad hoc. We recommend having a standing dispute board. And the real rationale behind that is that we want to focus on avoiding escalation of issues and avoiding them becoming disputes. So you want to give the best chance of project success where you raise issues early and address them in a real-time fashion. And there was some discussion about the potential gap, what FIDIC meant about enforcement under 20.4 or giving force to a DAB decision once issued. We at FIDIC issued a memorandum on 1 April in 2013 saying the intent was to enforce a DAB decision once issued, but some commentators found a gap to exist in the enforcement of decisions that were binding but not yet final, and the 2017 edition closed that gap. So it's adding clarity that the intent is avoiding the dispute if at all possible, and clear mandate of when the functionaries, either the engineer or the dispute board, dispute avoidance and adjudication board in this case, when and how they need to make decisions. So why multi-tiered dispute resolution? Why this prescriptive approach? The idea is to avoid disputes. You want independent specialists from the industry providing that reality check for the benefit of the project. And oftentimes we know that in the construction industry, you can have different interpretations, emotions get in the way, lots of possible scenarios. And so you want to realign the parties' expectations with the technical and contractual realities of the project step by step. And that allows this real-time job site dispute resolution provides a continual update and continual realignment. And so what you find is you contain those you identify these issues early and you contain the issues from escalating into disputes. And it serves somehow as an insurance against escalation into the ultimate phase of arbitration. So with that, that's just a quick overview of FIDIC, and I turn it back to you, Alex.
Thank you, dear Aisha, for your excellent presentation. Probably many participants of this webinar will have some questions, so I'm going to say it in Spanish. Les recuerdo que pueden formular sus preguntas en el banner que está ubicado en la parte baja de sus pantallas con Q&A. Asimismo, para facilitar la respuesta de los presentadores, les agradecería si las pudieran formular en inglés en la medida de lo posible. Following with this panel, I would like to introduce Mr. Jim Perry with another impressive bio. Jim is a member of the District of Columbia Bar and holds a JD degree in law and a BSc in civil engineering, and works from Paris as an arbitrator and dispute board member, specializing in the construction industry. In 2003, Jim opened PS Consulting, a founding member of the Global Construction and Infraestructure Legal Alliance. Jim has served on numerous dispute boards and ICC and DIC arbitration tribunals, including in Panama, Peru, and Guatemala, Central Europe, Central Asia, Africa, Southeast Asia, Australasia, and the Middle East, and is on the FIDIC President's list and the Syntec Ingénierie list of adjudicators in France, and is a supporting member of the Society of Construction Arbitrators. Jim has also been appointed as delay and/or quantum expert witness and co-counsel on many construction arbitrations and dispute boards involving dams, bridges, port terminals, and marine construction, roads, water management, hydro and thermal power plants, oil and gas, rail, buildings, among others. Jim has also provided legal support on urban renewal projects in Latin America and industrial, hotel, and leisure and other projects in France and internationally. Before founding PS Consulting, Jim worked as general manager of Euro Disneyland Imagineering and held director positions with both employer and contractors organizations with responsibility for contracting and dispute resolution of projects such as Euro Disney, the Petronas Towers in Kuala Lumpur, and major PPPs projects in the UK and Central Europe. PS Consulting also provides several accredited training modules worldwide on civic contracts. Jim is the past president of the Dispute Resolution Board Foundation, the RBF, and by the way, was the supervisor of my master thesis in Germany. Now, I let you with Mr. Jim Perry. Jim, when you want, you can take control of the screen as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alex. And thank you, Christian, as well, for the invitation. And good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you today. And certainly of all the introduction you gave there, I think the most pleasurable was definitely working with you on your master's thesis, Alex, and congratulations on that again. I will just bring up my slides now, if I just need a quick second here. Are those visible yet? They are? Great. Okay, very good. Well, thank you. I would like to continue where Aisha left off and bring this discussion to the international context, and I'll try to focus as much as I can on Latin America. But the discussion will also cover developments around the world. And in fact, at the moment, Latin America is one of the leading growth areas for the introduction of dispute boards. But international support comes from a number of areas, including FIDIC as probably the main source of support for dispute boards internationally. But also the International Chamber of Commerce publishes rules that are very useful. I think they have a great role to play as we go forward, because people often are looking to expand outside of the FIDIC contracts, which already have dispute boards baked into the general
Yeah,
conditions.
Jim, may I interrupt you for 1 second?
Certainly.
For some reason, the screen not appearing in total, so maybe you can show it in model presentation.
Could you say that again, Alex? Excuse me?
Yes, if you can't use the presentation mode, for some reason, we can see just a part of the screen.
Okay, all right, hang on just a second. Yes, yeah, thank you. Is that better? Great, okay, excuse me.
No,
thank you. The ICC rules are extremely useful because they can be bolted onto any set of general conditions, and this often is a stumbling point when people want to use dispute boards, because there's quite a bit of preparation that's needed. FIDIC already has that in their contracts, and the ICC rules will allow you to simply add that. The other large motor behind the use of dispute boards has been the development banks, as you've probably seen in the survey that ALDEC put out before this presentation. The World Bank has always been a leader, but so is the Asian Development Bank. The Inter-American Development Bank also supports the use of DBs, as does the Millennium Challenge Corporation, JICA, and a number of other investment banks. They've traditionally worked in collaboration with FIDIC and with the DRBF. In fact, one of the very first international dispute boards was a result of that collaboration between World Bank, FIDIC, and the early members and founders of the DRBF in Honduras for a project called El Cajon. And that was the first known international use of dispute boards. World Bank had become convinced of the benefits. World Bank was already using FIDIC contracts, and as a result, they introduced it back in the 1980s. And by the time 1992 came around, FIDIC had started to promote the use of dispute boards in their standard forms of contracts. But there are a number of arbitration chambers have now issued and published dispute board rules, including Milan Arbitration Chamber, the Beijing International Arbitration Chamber. CIARB has a set of rules, and the Chamber of Conciliation, Mediation, and Arbitration in Sao Paulo has also a published set of rules. And I'm only listing just a few of them. There are several more. The organization that is perhaps considered the founder of the concept is called the Dispute Resolution Board Foundation, DRBF, and you can see the connection to our website. This is the group that started the idea in the United States in the 1970s with a view to try to do something about the rise of litigation that had grown up in the US market. And they started the project on a tunneling project in Colorado in the mid-1970s. Since then, it's grown internationally. At this point, our membership is about 60% international, 40% in North America, Canada and the US anyway. And we have seen in the last 5 years, as I mentioned, an incredible growth of interest in Latin America. And the DRBF is planning to create a separate region now just for Latin America, which we think will launch in a conference in May in 2020 in Sao Paulo. And we're quite excited about that initiative. And I think it's representative of that survey that a number of you will have taken, I think just a few hours ago, where you've indicated 97% of the respondents felt that dispute boards can help avoid disputes. And it's extremely encouraging to see that kind of reaction. And I think that is one of the main reasons that we're seeing the kind of growth we're seeing in Latin America. I think Aisha touched on this, but I'd like to come back to it and put a little accent on this point. The The dispute board's main benefit is dispute avoidance. And as Aisha mentioned, dispute avoidance can't really occur when you have what they call ad hoc dispute boards, which means dispute boards that are formed only when a dispute arises, which often is when the project is quite advanced or even over. Dispute avoidance can take place. That means site visits. And site visits allow parties an opportunity to get together and discuss issues on what I call a level playing field. It allows the DB members to understand the project developments in near real time. And it also gives them an opportunity to propose dispute avoidance assistance. And dispute avoidance assistance can take several forms. The dispute board, so long as both parties are in agreement and both parties submit a joint request, a dispute board is able to issue an opinion on a particular matter. Those are very useful, and I'll cover that a little bit in a few minutes, but they also can nudge the parties to start working a way forward and a roadmap to try to solve their various issues. That roadmap may start by defining where are the blocking points and defining what work needs to be done. Is it more particulars? Is it a question of perhaps getting a dispute board opinion on a particular point of entitlement, a contract interpretation? Those can be done quickly, and that may unblock the way forward to examining questions of quantum or delay analysis. And they can also, if they see the opportunity is right, it's not uncommon for a dispute board to ask the parties to take a break, go spend an afternoon looking at a particular problem, whether it's design issue or whether it's quantum issue, and without the dispute board, and spend a few hours together, come back to the dispute board and report on progress. And perhaps then they may have been able to crystallize the hard matters that are blocking their progress, and then they can better formulate their requests to the DB for assistance. So this process takes place over several days, typically on a site visit. And it's much more than just an opportunity for the dispute board to understand the progress of the project, which of course in of itself is also important, because if a dispute does arise, it's very useful for the dispute board to have had the opportunity to essentially live the project in almost real time with the parties. Now, it's not always possible, however, to solve the problems this way. And decisions, referrals for and requests for the DB to make decisions or recommendations will come up. And there's several matters available for doing this in the various systems and rules that you find internationally. We call a dispute board that gives only non-binding recommendations. We tend to call that a DRB. But if you look closely at some of these rules, they often can become binding if no objections are issued. That's the case in the ICC rules, for example. The ICC has also combined dispute boards, which issue either recommendations or decisions, depending on the circumstances. That's probably a slightly more complicated subject than we have time for today, but that is an interesting option. And finally, DABs, dispute adjudication boards, which issue decisions which are arbitration or court, as Aisha's already explained. The final bullet point on this slide, I mentioned something that I've called a consent DAB decision. This is something that you don't actually find in any of the rules for the moment, but it's very similar to what you would see as a consent award in arbitration. And it goes along the principle of dispute avoidance with dispute boards. Parties often are encouraged to make their own settlements when a dispute board is present. but many times an employer, especially if it's a public employer, is going to have a problem with a settlement agreement. They may need and want, and the contractor may want this as well, something a little stronger, and a dispute board decision could be helpful. And more often you're seeing dispute boards now offer this service, that if the parties have reached a settlement, and provided that the dispute board has examined to at least a fairly large degree what the claims are, has looked at the settlement and finds that the settlement is prima facie an acceptable settlement, and that there's nothing suspicious about it, then the dispute board can issue a consent DAB decision, or as I say, the same as a consent award in arbitration, which would be then signed by all parties, and sometimes, and usually the DAB as well, of course. The standing versus ad hoc DABs, I've already really discussed this in one of the preceding slides. And we've also had a few words from Aisha about the change in the 1999 forms, excuse me, in the 2017 forms in the design, build, and EPC turnkey contracts, where FIDIC has dropped the use of the ad hoc dispute boards in favor of the standing dispute boards. Certainly those types of dispute boards, standing dispute boards, encourage dispute avoidance, and it is really almost impossible in the ad hoc situation, but not entirely impossible. But it certainly 90% of the benefit is lost. And I think part of the experience was the belief originally that DPC turnkey contracts and design build contracts would not generate disputes turned out to be a little bit overambitious. And in fact, disputes do develop in both those forms of contracts. And in fact, they form quite early, because the disputes often do arise over disagreements on how the project's being designed. Changing subjects slightly, I did want to mention to this audience an issue that I've noticed over the years living in civil law jurisdictions, that there is historically been some resistance to this idea of dispute boards actually issuing decisions, especially binding decisions, but even recommendations. And part of the resistance seems to come from the fact that the adjudicators tend to be at least 2/3 non-lawyers. And the civil law tradition versus the common law tradition is different on this point. In civil law, court-appointed experts typically must not stray into matters of contract entitlement in the law. And many civilists have found it difficult to accept the idea that an engineer might issue a binding decision that touches on points of contract or even law. The common law tradition has given this role to the engineer for years, and the common law lawyer is much less allergic to this type of situation. I have noticed in the last 10 years or so a substantial movement in this particular problem, and I find that the civil law countries are becoming more and more open to the concept. I'd like to talk just for a few minutes, very, very quickly, about the cost, because this is, the cost is something that is an issue for many users. People are concerned about spending money on disputes, and I feel that many times that's in part because the dispute avoidance element has not been properly taken into account. This slide just shows some extracts from a study, an Australian study from projects in the first part of the century, 2000 to 2005. It covered about 183 projects with about 20 billion Australian dollars worth of value. And it was able to compare within that 183 projects that had DBs and projects that did not have DBs. And as you can see, the cost is really quite small. The 3-person dispute board, even on a project from 30 million to 100 million, is about 0.129% for the DB fees and expenses. This is exclusive of actually dealing with referrals. And as the project size gets larger, you can see that the cost becomes really quite negligible, at least for the running costs of the DB. When referrals are made, again, I find that even complicated projects with a number of referrals for decisions, the percentage seems to run about, at the most, about 0.5% to 0.8% at the very top end of the range. Obviously, with smaller projects, there may be an advantage to looking at using a 1-person dispute board. But again, once the project gets to any size, I do believe that it is much better to have a 3-person dispute board. The old adage, 3 heads are better than 1 is certainly true. It's also not a tripling of the expense. Dispute board members are quite collegial, and I find that they do share the burden of the drafting of decisions, perhaps even more so than arbitrators share it amongst the 3 of them. Now, I think this slide is probably the most important of the presentation, because the return on investment is really where dispute boards, I think, become interesting to the parties. We've seen the investment isn't very high, but the return, I think, is much higher than any people actually really understood until recently. This Australian study showed that on the projects that had DB contracts, that they were on time or ahead of schedule 81% of the time. What's called the industry norm means projects with no DBs, that on time or ahead performance drops to 56%. Late performance where there are DBs, of course, that means it's 19%, and late performance in non-DB contracts is as high as 44%. With DB projects, only 4% ran over 3 months late in this study, and without a DB, the percentage of projects with more than 3 months delay was 26%. So I think for those who are worried about cost, you can see that there should be a very profitable return on investment here. People often refer to the DBs as being like insurance. I actually feel that's not a fair comparison, because insurance over time is designed for the insured party to lose money. If that wasn't the case, insurance companies would be out of business. So with dispute boards, the idea is this should always be a positive return to the investor. Alex, I think I'm running quite a bit over time here, so we have a couple questions that you wanted to cover, and I think we can maybe cover these in our panel discussion.
No problem, no problem. You can go forward. The organizations say that we have more time, so you can finish your presentation. No worries.
Well, thank you, Alex. I think we will cover these in our round table. So you've asked some very challenging questions, I think, Alex and Christian. You've asked, what is our opinion about how owners and contractors are dealing with the new normal in Latin America, and whether it's similar to the rest of the world. I have had a fair amount of experience in Latin America, but not during the pandemic. So I can't really compare to the rest of the world. But I am working in most other continents at the moment. And I would say that the answer is not well. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's your reaction in Latin America. I think that we'll discuss this more in the round table, but I really do feel that the current contracts don't really handle this situation adequately. And I'm not sure that we are going to be able to find a contractual solution or arrangement or negotiated way out of these situations. I suspect that all of these types of discussions will contribute to perhaps helping governments find a way to help us with these situations. Governments have been spending trillions of dollars to try to support the economies in various sectors for various reasons. I do suspect that the construction industry has been slightly ignored in some of this. And I do feel that this hole in legislation and the hole in contracts that are creating very important losses around the world needs to be addressed by government. Some of the largesse that's being spent on other sectors, I feel the construction sector is just as worthy, and there is a lot more that can be done to help us out.
If you'd like,
Thank
I can
you.
comment a little bit on these questions that you posed to us, Alex. And I would fully agree with everything that Jim had said. Moreover, I think if we look at a lot of the infrastructure spend, or some of the infrastructure spend, came from the development banks and the multilateral finance institutions. And much of their monies has now been reprogrammed into medical programs for PPE and the like. So, and I don't think that the answer, in my experience, is actually a regional answer. I think these unprecedented times with this global pandemic, people are acting in a very local way, even if we take the US, for example. So you can't, you see Texas is different than Nebraska, different than California, and cities within a state are acting, communities are acting differently. So I think with these uncertain times, my experience is that the response, including in the construction industry, is very local and much driven by personalities, character. But one thing that I've seen that has, when you asked the second question about recommendation, is this was adopted in Switzerland, where the idea of looking to industry institutions to try and develop a common interpretation of a particular contractual clause at a government level or at an institutional level, such that the parties can then take that and negotiate. Because in these uncertain, unprecedented times, you're not going to find standard answers. The answers are going to come from some sort of creativity. So although FIDIC focuses on risk allocation, and when the risks eventuate, the parties have a mechanism to discuss the impacts in terms of cost and time, it would be very difficult for any standard to address or help address the extraordinary. So I think you really kind of have to look at joint partnering and focus our minds, our individual minds, in mutually assured survival in facing this pandemic, while addressing the possibilities of rights and obligations and keeping a mind on those. But we've got to focus on creativity to find solutions in this unique time. So I leave it at that.
Perfect. Okay, maybe it's preferable that we move forward then to the topics that I would like to raise on the table in order to hold this little conversation. And I would like to give some context to my my first question. Today is observed that the parties in the contract are in polarized position. I know that. And part of the problem consists on the interpretation of the contractual clauses, particularly due to some of them are not clearly applicable under this new normal, or in some cases, the application makes that for one of the parties, usually the contractor, the fulfillment of the obligations turns much expensive than considered. And most likely that can bring a break in the relationship, considering that in your opinion, the dispute boards particularly could support a better conversation between the parties in order to change, especially the contractual clauses in discussion and under the new normal is a prohibited topic. And if it's the case, how could be?
Jim, would you like to go first? I'll invite Jim to start because it's a dispute board question. Then I can chime in
yes.
if I have something to add.
Yes, I think it's an interesting question, Alex. I unfortunately perhaps have a pessimistic nature in some areas, and I think that there are, as much of a promoter of the concept of dispute boards that I am, and that I have a very strong belief in the dispute avoidance potential of dispute boards, there are limits. I think in this particular situation, as you mentioned, Alex, we are seeing very polarized positions around the world. And in fact, even dispute boards are being handicapped in that we can't visit in person. We can have site visits virtually, but I'm afraid those just, while they're useful, and I certainly encourage people to continue with site visits virtually if that's the only option, they are not as effective at avoiding disputes as being able to sit in the room and really work those relationships that you've probably developed with the parties and trust that you've developed with the parties over a project that may be 3, 4, 5, 6 years and more. However, when it comes to simply saying the contract conditions didn't foresee this, they don't work, we need to try to come up with a new solution outside of the contract, I'm afraid there's only so much the dispute board can do. We can't change the contracts. We can suggest and nudge that the parties look for a negotiated settlement. We can try to help them find grounds for a compromise. But the amounts of money are substantial. And as you say, it may require actually changing the contractual clauses. If that's the case, then I think that it's going to be a very difficult uphill. If it's a matter of interpreting the contract clauses, and I think Aisha, I'm sure, will mention this, so I don't want to steal her thunder, but FIDIC has published a guide on COVID-19 and how to deal with these situations. It's an excellent document, and I'd recommend everybody looks at it. And certainly when it comes to interpreting the clauses that I think are probably of the most interest to contractors, like 8.4, where they speak about endemics, and 13.7, where we're talking about changes in legislation, these are two clauses where people don't look necessarily automatically. And I think the dispute boards can help the parties understand those two clauses that are different from clause 17 and 19, which are the reflex clauses, force majeure and consequences of force majeure, and employer's risk. It is useful there, but I think there are unfortunately limits in this context for DBs, I'm afraid to say.
Aisha, do you want to complement the
Yeah, I think, and thank you, Jim, for mentioning the FIDIC guide, because I think that's a useful tool to assist in a conversation. The way that guide was prepared was not to provide answers, but it presents various scenarios. And for example, did the government have a mandate of a shutdown? And then it walks through how you can look at the FIDIC contracts and maybe address that. So it provides a useful guide to frame thinking, to introduce to the FIDIC clauses, and also assist a dispute board member to have a conversation with the parties that is assisted by some tool or something in black and white that's published by FIDIC. So thank you for mentioning that. In my experience, I think, yeah, the virtual is what we have, and we have to use it. And the success is really, in my experience, dependent on how well the dispute board already knows the parties. So if you're just continuing with a relationship that you've developed, like as we are on this panel together, we all know each other quite well, it's an easier interaction. But if you're trying to launch a dispute board as an inception, then it makes it a bit more challenging to develop a relationship across a virtual platform. And so with the dispute boards that I have a longer experience with, I've had more success in kind of having a conversation. Mm-hmm. To start something off and kick it off, it's really, it tends to be ad hoc dispute boards, and disputes are escalating, and you get appointments a little bit too late and not being able to avoid a conversation. But one of the things I think as an industry that we all have to do, not just dispute boards, and I think FIDIC has been trying to focus on this, both with its guidance notes and with its COVID-19 webinars, is to say, this is a time that isn't just about rights and obligations necessarily, it's about survival of the industry. And I think to get your head around that, you need to kind of think a little differently and see how you can cooperate for mutually assured success. So in case you have a joint venture partner, there's 3 joint venture partners, and there's one that's gonna go bankrupt. Well, you're gonna have to have a conversation, or else you're all gonna go out of the picture. So I think it's the dispute boards, greater or lesser success, but I think industry, institutions, governments have to start taking a proactive lead to kind of frame the conversation in mutually assured success or mutually assured survival.
Perfect. Just to summarize and try to follow the reality principle and the pessimism of Jim, basically I understand that in your opinion it's possible that the dispute board could help the parties to get an arrangement, not particularly in order to change the conflictive clauses, but also the critical situations, providing a sort of space of reliability from the same parties. And that, in my opinion, is very interesting, because usually in Latin America, we use the dispute board mostly in the dispute resolution fashion instead of the standing mode. Mm-hmm. And your answers drive me back to the other related topic. And as you know, in Latin America, particularly in the public works, the owner is not available to review comprehensively the contract clauses. This reluctance, the inflexibility, basically to the governments.
Yes, well, I think the answer is, as Aisha says, it's at a higher level. It's at the institutional level and really even the government level that can help. An example in Algeria, not so many years ago, the country, in Tunisia, not so many years ago, there was a revolution, and the country was in a great deal of turmoil for a couple of weeks. And the new government, the federal government, then did pass legislation that allowed, a special case for contractors to claim under force majeure. and they went ahead and they defined exactly what the entitlement might be to contractors in that type of situation. That was quite helpful legislation, and perhaps this is the sort of thing that Aisha might have been referring to, but it's certainly what I was trying to refer to earlier, is that I think the construction industry probably needs some special legislation. It may be one-off in different countries that can allow agencies to modify their contract terms because federal legislation in your country allows it, and even mandates it. This kind of lobbying, I think, is what's needed, because I'm not sure that governments really have actually picked up on this as a need in many countries yet.
But basically, we would like, but it is not just my question. I would like to know if, in your opinion, this reluctance of the owner to change the clauses in this new normal is, in your opinion, a cultural aspect of Latin America, or it appears in other regions of the world?
I don't think it's be curious to see what Aisha says, but I don't consider it a cultural issue. I consider it a ingrained sense of procurement rules that reign throughout the world in every executing agency.
I would
dealing with it. Do we have an example to follow, for instance?
Would you mean an example where an executing agency did unilaterally or negotiate a change in the actual clauses? Mm-hmm. I don't personally have an example of that, and that again is why I raised the Tunisian example, because once the government assists at the highest levels, then my experience in that particular case was the executing agency was actually quite relieved to have an answer.
Perfect. That is very interesting, because one could suppose that in Latin America, the inflexibility to change the contract is just a cultural aspect of Latin America, but it seems not.
I often find this, a lot of people, as I train in different parts of the world, or dispute boards in the different part of the world, often people will say, where I'm from, it's a little different. We always do this, and this, and we resist this, or we resist that.
Right.
Or we have a problem with this aspect of construction or that aspect. And I actually find we have, as far as our problems go, we have a lot more in common than you might think around the world.
Yeah. Perfect. Moving forward to the next topic, and this is the particular question to Aisha. You know that more than 600 million people speak Spanish as a mother language. You knew that.
However, I didn't know that there were that many. I knew that I don't speak Spanish, but yes.
However,
yeah.
FIDIC has just 2 accredited trainers in native Spanish. So how do you see the chances that FIDIC provides more training and trainers in Spanish? Has FIDIC a plan for Latin America?
Well, I have really good news for you, I think. Right, or I hope will be good news. I reached out to the Secretariat just before this call. So if you go to the FIDIC website and look at accredited trainers and put Spanish in, you'll end up with 6. So we've increased it from 2, which is good, but that's not where we are. And we've heard this call from the Inter-America Development Bank, the World Bank, that we need to have not only trainers but adjudicators that are available locally and speak the right language and do the right, understand the culture as well as the language, and are able to do that. So you'll be, I hope, pleased to know 2 points. We are addressing this in a way to make trainers and adjudicators available at a more broad level in diverse parts of the country, not only in Spanish, but in Arabic and Chinese and Vietnamese and available regionally as well. So FIDIC is going to partner with DRBF to increase the breadth of adjudicators. So the president's list isn't limited to Jim and myself and a few others that are not available more globally. And so FIDIC right now has stood up a FIDIC credentialing independent company from FIDIC that is going to focus on accreditation and certification of FIDIC adjudicators, FIDIC trainers, and so we've heard the call. It's taken quite a bit of time because we wanted to get it right. We wanted to be ISO compliant with fairness, credentialing, making sure when we have a FIDIC credential that it's solidly based and globally supportable. And that's why we're partnering with DRBF to do the right credentialing for the adjudicators. And we're partnering going forward to have that credentialing away from delivery of training, such that we can increase the number of Spanish-speaking trainers, Arabic-speaking trainers, Chinese-speaking trainers, and the like. So I hope that is a reasonable answer. I know it took too long to get to where we are, but at least we are here and we're moving forward, I believe, in the right fashion to have a cost-effective way to be able to use. One of the questions on the Q&A I saw is saying that the FIDIC documentation and activities are so expensive, and do we feel that that is away from the focus of expanding access? And I would agree with the question that we tried to increase access by our collaboration with the multilateral development banks. And so if we look at the FIDIC Pink Book, which I didn't talk about, which was part of the standard bidding document in IADB and the World Bank, that was made freely available to the users. So that was one way to do it. But obviously that wasn't, it didn't focus on every project delivery method. It didn't, so the expansion of that and we're in cooperation with the development banks, we're trying to find a cost-efficient way to provide the documents, to provide access to training, and to provide access to the adjudicators. Because if they're too expensive, Jim went through a very thoughtful, the statistics that were returned from the study that show its value for money. But if it's too much of an investment, or it's not in the right language, or it's too difficult to access busy dispute board members, it's not going to help you manage your dispute. So that's maybe a longer answer than you had wanted, but it's, I hope, a positive one.
Yes, it's very, very positive. Very good news. I understand that you will create a new organization for training and trainer. That's very, very good. And on the flip side, James, could you share more information about the Latin American region 4 in the RBF? How's going on? How this is the current status?
Yes, absolutely. The way DRBF has been organized the last 10 years, it's been set up in 3 regions. Region 1 is the United States and Canada. Region 3 is Australia and New Zealand. And we have had a fairly thin number of members spread around the rest of the world that we've grouped into what we call Region 2, which is the rest of the world. It's always been our goal to grow the use of dispute boards and create smaller regions more locally. And we've found that it is taking time. But the first area that we see enough critical mass to create its own region, it has been in Latin America. And it is because of growth and interest in countries like Chile, Peru, and Brazil, where we're seeing Ecuador, where we're seeing use, and Costa Rica, as you know, has a very active group as well. This group has been particularly active in promoting legislation. which I think is an excellent initiative, because I think it does immediately put the concept of dispute boards on legislators' radars, and therefore executing agencies are going to pay attention. The initiative really started to really get some momentum with the Rio Olympics. There was a very active group in Brazil that managed to petition the Olympic Committee. There was a very thorough but very rapid deployment of trainers, and a panel put in place with about, I think, about 40 people who were qualified. Regrettably, the government did pull funding for the dispute boards at the last minute, and they did not implement them on the Rio projects, but it created a hardcore group of people who wanted to see this move forward. So our Region 2 immediate past president, Julio Bueno, in Sao Paulo, he is leading up our effort to put the team together. We have a large committee working on it, and if anybody is interested in helping and helping us grow, the website contact is there, but please contact me personally, and I'd be happy to put you in touch with our committee that's organizing the creation of Region 4, and also with our executive director, Ann Russo, who's based in the US. But I'm afraid COVID has slowed our progress down a little bit. We were hoping to roll out a full independent Region 4 by May next year, but to give us enough time to organize Sao Paulo properly as a launch, we have postponed that by 1 year to May 2022 now.
Well, so we have very interesting news from FIDIC and the RBF for Latin America. Local branches with Latin flavor. Right? Yes. Well, now
we have a number of questions on the Q&A. Did you want to address this, Alex?
Exactly. I'm going to move forward to the. Yes, we are almost over the clock. Yes, some questions. Some of them was responded. Giovanni Munoz said, Aisha, in a contract of concession, the dispute board will have competence for solving issues on every field, financial, permissions, construction, environment, during the pre-construction stage, or only will have competence for solving construction issues?
Yeah, I will. I participated a bit with UNCITRAL in developing the model law on PPPs, and there's a couple of approaches that one can take to this. If you want to have a dispute board that covers your concession or your project from cradle to grave, the idea would be to have a larger pool of dispute board members that have various competencies, economic, financial, technical, of the nature of your works. You define the chair, and once the dispute arises, so this pool of dispute board members is there, and once the dispute arises, the chair can then choose the right competencies to be the two wingmen on that particular dispute. That's one way to do this. Or you can have separate dispute boards for the concession contract and for the technical portion of the contract. So it depends on how the parties want to have this overarching view, or you can have the individual dispute boards focused on that particular competency. Jim?
Yes, well, it's an interesting question, and one that the DRBF's been trying to grapple with for a number of years. And we have published some white papers on using dispute boards and PPP projects, which are available for download from our website. One is focused on international, one on the US. I think it's difficult to get such a polyvalent dispute board that can handle all of these issues in the lifetime of a concession project. And I had spent time in the UK working on PPPs for a large continental contractor. And my view is that it would be useful to find a way to do this and to implement it more frequently. My experience is that these pre-construction issues are as important, if not more important than the construction issues, and often are the seed that causes the construction issues as well. And including even once you get to preferred tender stage. My experience in the UK was, I'm afraid lawsuits break out in the pre-tender stage. And maybe in some ways, as soon as you become preferred tenderer, perhaps it's not a bad idea to even have a dispute board helping you from that stage. These are large, complicated projects. They require the type of flexibility from executing agencies that, as you've mentioned, Alex, they don't frequently exhibit. And at the early stage in a process where they have such a long-term relationship, I do think a dispute board can help, and as soon as they can get in the door, the better.
Maybe I can complement the question, because I assume that this question is coming from Peru. The procurement law in Peru have limited topics for the dispute board panel, and maybe this is the reason of this question. I understand that the best way is that the dispute board don't have limits to any topics, but unfortunately it happens in some statutory laws. We have another question. Maybe it's not easy to respond for our panelists, but in any case, I'm just going to mention, what is the perspective in South America of the field contracts in the works impacted by COVID? I don't know if anyone has something to say.
I mean, I think that was kind of addressed when we were talking about is Latin America kind of unique in their response? I think some parties are very positional, employers, particularly public sector employers, are very reluctant to change or give away rights, or they're encumbered, but that's not unique to Latin America. That's probably more of a characteristic of public sector employers. And I think one of the things, like Jim had mentioned in his Tunisian experience, or the idea of in Switzerland, if there is a ministry that has lots of FIDIC contracts, they may help their personnel, their own personnel, and their projects, if they can just come with so for the Ministry of Electricity to come up with a uniform interpretation of how they're going to implement Clause 19 if they have a FIDIC contract. And that then it empowers their personnel to have a discussion and not be so rigid. So I think because we're facing unprecedented times, sometimes people freeze and and solidify even more. So I think it's going to take governmental action to unlock some of the possibilities, as Jim was saying earlier.
Yes, and this is happening in worldwide. So
yeah.
It's not just a matter related just to South America. James, do you want to say something?
Very quickly, I think a substantial advantage of FIDIC contracts along the lines of what Aisha is saying about the Swiss ministry perhaps giving a standardized interpretation where issues have arisen. The fact that FIDIC is used around the world, it does mean that there's a lot published on it, and often there is a consensus, not always, but often there is a consensus, or at least a majority view that you can find about how to interpret certain FIDIC clauses in certain situations. And because it's used so globally, I think it's useful for users to be able to compare what their neighbors are doing, and also just the fact that the volume is such that there's quite a body of knowledge out there lex fidic, if you want to call it, lex fidica, that can help you come up with the solutions you need.
Perfect. Thank you, Jim. We have a couple of questions about our personal addresses. Unfortunately, we can't provide it, but all of us are in LinkedIn. If you want to contact us, you can use this way. And I have a last question. The previous was responded before. What are the main difference of the, maybe what are the main aspects of the Emerald contracts for underground works?
I'll just quickly, we launched this this is a joint effort between FIDIC and the International Tunneling Association. And it is the main difference between underground works and above ground works is the nature of the risks that the project is exposed to and how you're going to handle those risks. So what you'll see in the Emerald book is it starts out with a FIDIC yellow book, a design build type of approach, with clear understanding and a clear risk allocation matrix of those types of risks that are unique to underground works and the handling of those. So you'll find the claims, the risk allocation and the claims process somehow mostly unique, but it is, what's similar is it is a design build type of approach similar to the yellow. It focuses on the claims process and focuses on having a dispute avoidance and adjudication board, but really addressing and giving a framework to the parties to understand what risks belong to the employer and what risks belong to the contractor, and gives a much more prescriptive view of how to address those within the project execution process.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
I think the biggest attribute of the Emerald book is that it does create this geotechnical baseline, which I think is extremely useful for most underground work. And it has been very well received, Aisha, hasn't it, since its launch?
Yes, it has. It definitely has. And I think, having this, the partnership between the International Tunneling Association and FIDIC, where FIDIC brings a contractual mechanism and the International Tunneling Association brings this technical acumen for underground works, was a very successful partnership. Perfect.
We are totally out of time.
I think we're over time. We've overstayed our welcome. But Alex, I just want to say, I don't know how you're distributing the slides, but you're more than welcome to distribute the slides that I used. I think you have a copy of them to the participants.
Yes, for sure.
Likewise.
And I would like to say you both thank you very much for sharing your time with us and with the attendees. It was great to have you both in this webinar, and I'm totally sure that our participants are leaving this panel with important information and added value. I don't know, I would like to know if you have some final words to share with our attendees. Aisha, Jim, who wants to start?
I would just like to thank you and Christian very much for giving the platform to FIDIC to present and to discuss. And it's always such a pleasure to be with you, Alex, and with Jim, and to exchange views and to exchange our experiences and to kind of still see a normal around the world. And I look forward to seeing you again, both post-COVID physically, either in Stockholm or somewhere else, maybe in Latin America next time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, Alex, again for the invitation, Christian as well, and appreciate all the participants' patience and the staying over. But it's been a real pleasure to be able to speak with you today, and an invitation to meet in Sao Paulo in May 2022 for the launch of Region 4. I hope to,
yes,
hope to see you there.
See you there. Thank you very much, Jim, sincerely. And thank you all for participating in this event. And I'm going to turn back to Spanish. Yo también me despido por mi parte. Muchísimas gracias a todos por su participación en este evento de cierre y nos veremos en otra oportunidad. Espero que esta vez en persona. Muchas gracias y los dejo a continuación con la coordinación de ALDEC. Thank you all.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, James. Thank you, Aisha. It was a great panel. The topics were very interesting, and well, the audience chat a lot, and I think we have a lot of questions after to respond via chat as well. So, ahora vamos a dar la palabra al presidente de ALDEC, don Cristian Díaz, que nos va a dirigir unas palabras de cierre para la clausura de este congreso. Así que, don Cristian, adelante.
Gracias, Silvia. First of all, thanks Aisha and Jim for sharing your ideas and knowledge to the audience. It is important for Latin America the support that you have given to us through this event and the panel, and we are looking forward for having you both in future events. Also, thanks Alex for the standing coordination of the panel. I'm going to switch to Spanish now. El lunes iniciamos con una reflexión sobre el futuro de arbitraje en construcción en Latinoamérica. Luego conversamos sobre buenas prácticas y los contratos de construcción. Después sobre la mediación junto con el derecho colaborativo y los dispute boards. Para pasar a algunos hot topics del arbitraje y el uso de la tecnología en la industria de la construcción. Y finalizar hoy con el peritaje y algunas reflexiones finales respecto a lo que se ha desarrollado en FIDIC y en el Dispute Resolution Board Foundation respecto a los dispute boards. El primer día indiqué que esta semana Latinoamérica iba a ser una sola. Y hoy lo puedo confirmar luego de una exitosa semana del Congreso en la que se ha debatido ampliamente temas de suma importancia para la industria y ALDEC ha servido de catalizador del conocimiento para sus asociados. Tenemos que mantenernos unidos para mejorar juntos en nuestra región tan viva y necesitada de desarrollo. Esperamos sigan apoyando nuestra asociación y se sumen a los grupos de trabajo. Tenemos nuevos proyectos que anunciaremos muy pronto y por favor estar atentos a nuestras redes sociales. Para terminar, quisiera dar un gran agradecimiento primero que todo a Silvia Trejos, nuestra directora ejecutiva, por toda su labor en estos días y previo al Congreso, a los patrocinadores BRIC, NPG y ANCURA, a las instituciones que dieron su apoyo para la difusión del evento, a nuestro directorio, Eliana Beraldi, Krista Müller, Silvia Trejos, Alberto Fernández, Gustavo Paredes, Fernando Marcondes, Francisco González de Cosío, Salvador Fonseca y Eric Britton, a los coordinadores de grupo de trabajo y también coordinadores de los paneles del evento, Marcela Radovic, Krista Müller, Silvia Trejos, Salvador Fonseca, Israel Almodóvar, Gustavo Paredes, Fernando Landeros y Fernando Marcondes. Y a los expositores que dieron su tiempo para compartir sus conocimientos con nosotros y, de final, pero no menos importantes, a todos los participantes en todos estos días del evento que pudieron acompañarnos y participar con preguntas y comentarios en los paneles. Les deseamos lo mejor en estos tiempos de pandemia y que estén bien, que tengan un lindo día y un fin de semana. Hasta luego. Gracias. Chao.
Hasta la próxima.
Hasta luego, gracias.